Welcome back. So Matt Spiegel from MediaLink is here, and you guys probably familiar face, right, to most of you, to the retailers and agencies in the room, certainly. You guys had a town hall.
We did.
Apparently most of it was safe zone and off the record.
I think so, until we share all of it now.
Good. See, we tricked you guys. So I just want to spend the next little while kind of talking about what you talked about. Again, this is all part of this way that we try and shape, the following sessions after this and tomorrow as well. What surprised you the most about what you guys chatted about?
I think two things. One is, and we'll talk about the topics themselves, but there's actually pretty good consistency about what everyone's dealing with. And again, I'm sure not at the level of priority for everybody. I mean, we ended up having 5 themes that I think were actually pretty organic to the process. So that's kind of one. And then 2 was, I don't know, I'm a little bit surprised by. Listen, I felt like there's a good amount of experimentation, right? But it also felt, it feels like the topic of digital meets retailing still sounds like a very broad set of topics that in my mind felt like for a lot of people it still feels very overwhelming on how to connect these dots. And again, I guess a certain level of, all right, there's still this higher level order of, there's some major strategic questions to answer, was one of the things that I left feeling like, okay, like there's some work to do.
So I've always been curious about this because you had this mix of retailers and agencies in the room. Are there any differences between what the two of them? Because one of them are the ones who spend the money, and the other ones, just channel the money. So was there something that diverged?
Well, I think you certainly you see from the agencies. I think you guys in the room would appreciate that. There's a lot more tactical understanding of what's possible when we get into the realm of digital media and digital marketing, kind of campaign management, investment decisions that are really focused on digital. The agency folks, I think, have a lot more exposure and experience in making a lot of those day-to-day decisions. I think the retailer side of the house, you guys think much more strategically, more broadly about the kind of the big challenges that are overarching. Again, things like how do I connect my in-store environment to my e-commerce business? Like what is the link? We talked about the importance of mobile and how much that is really changing the way you have to think about a kind of even an e-retail business, which is, one of the comments was as much as half of traffic is coming from mobile devices, but nowhere near half the orders is. So how do you think about that problem and that solution? And I think you see the retailers struggling with those types of questions, which are meaty, real. Those are the core business challenges. And the agencies are then, you guys are really doing the execution of how do you spend money to solve some of those problems, but not necessarily surrounding them at the same level that the retailers have to.
So you sort of mentioned this this overwhelming confusion almost when it comes to that big question, e-commerce, brick and mortar, where does it all come together? What were some of the ways people are getting those things to come together?
Yeah, and I think I'm sure I said the word confusion. As I hear it played back, I'd say I think it's a level of, like it's a mountain. Right? And where do I go first? And what's the big challenge? Do I deal with this mobile attribution problem? Do I deal with merchandising? Do I deal with, what were the other ones we talked about? Do I deal with understanding my customers and who they are and how do I market them using the data I have? Content marketing was a big theme. Like, everyone's got to do it. Is it paying off? Right? Which is actually consistent from other brand summits that you and I were together. Like these themes are all there, and I think there's a feeling of like, man, these are a lot of big challenges. I think the pace of the change feels like it's speeding up. And so I think there's a little bit of, man, what do I do first? And I've come here to figure out what are others doing first, and what other people are answering along those lines so that I can, that's the priority, let me go that direction type of look.
Did you guys talk about sort of platforms and how they might help in kind of mitigating some of what's going on?
Well, we did in a couple different directions because the word platform obviously takes a lot of connotations. We briefly touched on the fact that there seems to be a theme of a lot of people, retailers, quote unquote, re-platforming, really thinking about the back-end e-commerce systems, your web design systems, and all the change that kicks off. So that was one set of platform discussions. When we talked about the role of understanding the customers and your own data, we talked about the need to build an ID system, and whether that's an ad server or the attribution vendors and all of those platforms. And we also got into kind of when we talked about more of a media-specific kind of attribution and first-party data and the use of customer knowledge, we talked about all the programmatic platforms. And so, the buying, the DSPs, the DMPs. And so we, at a high level kind of touched on those different categories. And I think there was a general, I think it's hard for me to tell in this short time. You guys were getting together tomorrow, so we'll see in round 2 if we pull out some more nuggets from what was learned again today. But there's a pretty common theme of technology really matters in my mind. But again, it's one of those, man, there was a comment, hey, they all sound the same. I actually might have said that because I know that. And so dealing with man, there are so many vendors, what's the right one and what do I sell first? I think it keeps coming back to that. These are some meaty challenges, and there's this feeling of where do I go now? Cool.
Well, on that note, we're gonna, in very true, Weather Channel fashion, go over there to Hillary, who's standing by the challenge board. So Hillary's got, she spent the last 15 minutes kind of putting all these together, all the stuff that you guys wrote down into some themes. So she's gonna kind of run them down for us and see if there was any overlap there between what you guys talked about. So over to you.
All right, thanks, Shireen. There's definitely a lot of overlap. What we're seeing here, we're gonna start with retailers and agencies, and obviously the biggest challenge is omni-channel and figuring it out. I like the phrase someone wrote, click and mortar, and it's, it represents what's happening. I think it breaks down into 2. Attribution's a big one. It's, where are people buying? How do we trace back each purchase? But then it's also, physical footsteps, bringing people in store, figuring out, measuring online impact, and also, getting people to actually shop in your brick and mortar stores. So that, it kind of blends in with data, data management, with beacons, with location, accuracy on people's cell phones. People they want to know why you're using their data. So, leveraging first-party data, figuring out why, what you know about your customers and how to use that. That's a big one, and it relates back to attribution as well.
Well, the beacon thing is kind of interesting too, because I don't know if you guys saw today, but Facebook is like handing out beacons, right?
Yep, free ones.
And you've kind of been writing a lot too about sort of beacons, and so some of the issues, there are issues from the retailer side about beacons, but there's also issues from the consumer side. Like, are both of those reflected in those, or is that mostly from like the retailer perspective? I think
it's from the retailer's perspective because the physical beacon itself, it's really just a piece of plastic, and it's all the data that it's transmitting that's important, and a lot of it is, do you download an app? Do you you have to turn it on, you have to opt in, but how do you not, barrage people with junk that they don't need on their personal phones? And I think a lot of it with that too is, overcoming the urge to just provide coupons. I think that's, I think that came up in the town hall meeting. So, how do you get past, how do you make it, valuable for the consumer, keep them coming back and keep them using it?
Cool.
Great, yeah, so like we talked about before too, content, platforms, figuring out, do we jump onto every platform with a strategy, or do you sit back and just, let Snapchat happen? And, platform confusion and content and commerce, it's all, big question. Brands need to tell their stories. They need to figure out where. Is it a personal blog that works best? Is it, great Twitter engagement? And in the end of the day, does it actually lead to purchases? So that's, a big question. And then a lot of times you see with platforms, it's the adoptability of it, and it also leads back to relevancy. Someone wrote overcoming senior egos, and so that's, a big point as retailers, progress with the digital world. And of course, it wouldn't be a retailer challenge board without Amazon, just Amazon. So figuring out how to beat that challenge.
I would say, real quick, we did in the town hall, we did get into the social platforms for a minute, and it was actually interesting to see. I asked the question: are people pretty excited about the Pinterest and the potential buy button? There was, I think, a pretty, not like everyone started jumping up for joy or anything, but there's a pretty, I think, general feeling of that's interesting. And then I found interesting, and again, more knowledge maybe for me than a lot of you guys, is there's a pretty big mix in which retailer liked which platform. Some really liked Facebook, some thought that wasn't working at all, some were big into Twitter and Vine. That there seems to be, depending on what audience you have, that there seems to be a mix on which social platform you care most about from a retail perspective.
And because there was also, and I think one of the things was, I think there's someone in the room that said that they didn't have, most of their demographic was relatively really young, and they said like they were not on Facebook.
Not on Facebook.
Like we're not even bothering.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Tech providers, really quickly, some of the big themes.
Yep, tech providers. A big trend here is communicating with the retailers. Someone talked about self-serving. Reaching them and getting them to take a risk, adopt new technologies. finding new customers and growing, globalization itself. And then attribution as well is something that tech providers are struggling with. Data sharing, flawed attribution models, and effective attribution models, and how those all relate back to the end of, as you're working with retailers, because it's all about where the purchase is coming from. And then finally, differentiation was a big one as well. How do you stand out, and how do you sell your product and make sure that people are understanding what they're getting from you and why it's valuable?
Cool, awesome. Thanks, Hillary,
You're
and
welcome.
thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you.
So right before we move on to our next wonderful session,